And so our last presenter before lunch is, quite honestly, this dude's a genius. So I will just, and you guys are going to get to see that yourselves. Dr. Mark Lundeberg is a physicist working on Bitcoin Cash protocol development. Before becoming involved in blockchain, he spent 4 years at the Institute of Photonic Sciences in Barcelona as a postdoctoral researcher in graphene, optoelectronics, and plasmonics, and has authored many scientific papers on these and related topics. He holds a PhD in physics from the University of British Columbia. Dr. Mark Lundeberg, welcome to the stage.
All right, hi everybody. That was a great talk about privacy, just as an introduction to why privacy matters. I'm going to be doing a bit of a deeper dive into one very specific technical aspect, one new technical innovation that's coming to Bitcoin Cash as a result of the consensus upgrades. So if you guys have been following the Bitcoin Cash upgrades in May, the upcoming one in November, you would know that I'm sort of been at the core of making sure these upgrades happen and designing them carefully. And I'm going to talk about one interesting thing that's going to be available starting in November. And so just to start out, I want to point out one fact about Bitcoin Cash a lot of people know, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. The majority of Bitcoin Cash economic activity is on what are called paid-to-public key hash addresses. So you look at the Bitcoin Cash address, it starts with the Q. This is just a simple address that has a public key. To unlock your coin, you make a signature. It's the most basic kind of Bitcoin primitive. And so if you go on a block explorer, you look at a recent block, I just happened to pick one, and I was clicking through some transactions. You'll see a lot of token transactions. You'll see people posting miscellaneous data, but then you'll see these like economic transactions where you can see people are moving some amount of Bitcoin Cash from these addresses to these addresses. And these addresses start with a Q. So these are these paid-to-public key hash addresses that are super common. They're all over the place. And so you can see a little bit about what's going on. You can see that probably this person spent 0.01 Bitcoin Cash. You don't know who they are, though. You don't know much more except that they're using these paid-to-public key hash addresses. And so when people are doing the blockchain analysis, mostly what they're going to work on is trying to link together multiple transactions. But that's sort of like the information they have to work with. But if you look at more transactions, you're going to see these what are called paid-to-script hash addresses, so P2SH, and these are Bitcoin Cash addresses that start with a P. And yeah, so here's another example. I just clicked through a few more transactions, and I found this one. So these are like 10 times less common, I would say, than the paid-to-public key hash addresses. And that doesn't sound so bad, so they're a little bit rarer, so you're giving away a little bit more information about what you're doing because you're doing something unusual, right? You're using these paid-to-script hash addresses. In this case, it's spending from a paid-to-script hash, it's sending to a paid-to-script hash. You can see the amounts. So you can do the blockchain analysis, but also you know, okay, so there's something going on. This guy's using a smart contract, right? But there's an additional privacy problem, which is actually the paid-to-script hash address is a smart contract. And that smart contract is actually telling a story about exactly what was going on. And the reason is that to spend these addresses, you have to provide the full script, the full smart contract that's behind that address. So in this case, it's a 2 of 3 multi-signature. This is the most common paid-to-script hash. This is the most common smart contract. Just you need 2 signatures out of 3 public keys. But that's not the only script. You can have different arrangements of multi-signatures, or you can have these arbitrary scripts, and they can have all sorts of things. So Gabriel mentioned a little bit about all these cool scripts that people could do. There's been lots of innovations, especially recently with the check data sig. But some basic things are like payment channels. You can do atomic swaps. Actually, just to tell a short story, like I got involved in Bitcoin a year and a half ago, and the atomic swaps and the fact that Bitcoin can do the smart contracts was one of the things that really made me fall in love with it. Like Bitcoin didn't need these smart contracts to just be a payment system. It could have just been paid to public key hash addresses, and that's it. but it has this script system that I found that amazing, and you can do these atomic swaps between cryptocurrencies. It's kind of crazy that this is possible. You can trustlessly trade Bitcoin for Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin and not have any trust issues with who goes first. And you can do these like escrow contracts like the local.bitcoin.com. You can do this Mecenas. This is like a donations smart contract. And it looks kind of crazy, but that's because it's been compiled from another language. But the point is, like, when you use one of these smart contracts, that goes on the blockchain. Everybody can see that. And especially if you're a blockchain analysis company, you're looking at that because that's like super rare. It's telling you like, okay, this is a local.bitcoin.com escrow contract. They're always that template. And that might be a bad thing because maybe you're using an exchange and after you withdraw the money, you do this escrow contract and maybe the exchange decides they don't want you to do that. And so they start censoring you. They kick you off the exchange or before you deposit or something. So that's not very nice. And it would be nice if nobody knew that you're doing one of these smart contracts. It would be nice if that didn't appear on the chain. So yeah, just to review those problems, these pay-to-script hash addresses that start with a P, they're rare. You have to reveal the smart contract in full, the full script. People can match that to a template. They can tell exactly what you're doing. And they can also tell that usually there's like multiple branches in these smart contracts, different conditions, and you can actually tell which condition was satisfied. So you get lots of information. And yeah, that's a bit of a problem with these smart contracts. If you do an atomic swap, people can tell exactly which cryptocurrency you swapped against because there's a unique identifier in there that links the two atomic swaps on the different blockchains. So that's not good. So it would be great if we could just use these pay-to-public key hash addresses. We never had to use these pay-to-script hash addresses. Wouldn't that be awesome? It turns out there is a way, actually. So I'm going to get a little bit into the technical bit. If you're not interested in this, you can just doze off for a little bit. But I think it's an interesting just to dive into this, just to see how this works. So there are two essential pieces. You need to be able to do multi-party key aggregation. So you need a public key that belongs to multiple parties for this pay-to-public key hash address. And then you need to move the smart contract off the chain. And I'm just going to go into detail about those two pieces. So the key aggregation, the idea is you want to make a single public key that actually belongs to multiple people, which sounds kind of weird. And it is possible. You can take, like Alice can have her public key, Bob can have his public key, and they just combine them together using an operation, just represented as addition to simplify it. It's almost that simple. And then they get a public key, and that's the public key they can tell to the world. But in private, they know that this public key belongs to both of them, in fact. But then the question is like, okay, there's this public key, but how can you produce a message from that public key? How do you sign that message securely? So one thing they could do is they could just tell each other their secret keys, and then they would sign the message together, but that's not very secure because then you've just given away your secret key, so yeah, that's no good. But it turns out that you can do these operations where Alice does some signing operation, Bob does some signing operation, and again, there's some mathematical operation, pretty close to just addition. You just add these two signature pieces, and you get a combined signature. And that's a little bit complicated behind the scenes, but you can make a library for that, it's fine, these exist. And what's important is what appears on chain is a single public key, so you can have a paid-to-public key hash, a single signature, that's totally normal, it verifies the normal way. Nobody can tell it, nobody's any the wiser that behind the scenes there was all this crazy cryptography that was happening. And yeah, that's, it's actually quite easy to do this with Schnorr signatures. So after we introduced the Schnorr signatures in the May upgrade, I spent an afternoon and I wrote a little Python script that lets you do this key aggregation. So we made a transaction signature together with this paid-to-public key hash address. Starts with a Q, it's a single public key, but behind the scenes that was actually me and two other guys working together doing this off-chain signing protocol. And if we didn't tweet about it and talk about how awesome this is that we did this thing, nobody would know. It would just be another Bitcoin Cash transaction, regular, yeah. So yeah, you need to take a little bit of care. Greg Maxwell wrote this paper with some co-authors, and they talk about doing this process securely. So if you're interested in this, read that paper because there are some gotchas, but it's fairly simple. So yeah, that's basically a solved problem, doing this multi-party key aggregation. And then the second part I mentioned was moving the smart contract off-chain. So I'm going to use like a little diagram just to represent the way the transactions are going to work here. And just for comparison, I'm going to show the on-chain case. And if you're looking to like layer 2 protocols, this is very similar to like layer 2 stuff, but this is not layer 2. This is not for making a payment channel network, making this over-complex system. This is just for a little peer-to-peer thing where you move your smart contract off-chain. All right, so the on-chain case, where you use a pay-to-script hash address, you make a funding transaction that goes to that pay-to-script hash address, it confirms. So this is Alice, she sends her money to a contract. Why would she do that? Well, usually the smart contract has some sort of refund branch. If things go wrong, that the money can go back to Alice. But I'm not going to put that in the contract because this is quite generic. And then Alice and Bob do their smart contract thing. Depends on the smart contract. Doesn't really matter here. But the final result is that some of the money goes back to Alice, the change output, and some of the money goes to Bob. And then they're done. So instead, we can move that smart contract off-chain. And this is how you do it. So Alice is first going to send her money to an aggregated public key address that she shares with Bob. But she's not going to broadcast that transaction yet. She's just going to keep that private. And then she goes to Bob and she says, okay, I need you to sign a transaction that when the money goes to that address, it's going to be on this, there's going to be a coin with this serial number. I need you to sign a transaction that's going to move my money onto this smart contract. And Bob says, okay, fine, that's your money. Like, yeah, I'll let you do that, that's fine. And Alice gets back the transaction, it's valid, great. So she broadcasts the funding transaction, but not the second transaction. Alice and Bob know this transaction. They could broadcast it, but they don't do it yet. And then they do their thing, like before. They finish their smart contract and they make their closing out transaction. But they also don't broadcast that one. They could, but they don't. So at this point, they have these two off-chain transactions that could be broadcasted. It would result in the proper result of the smart contract. But then Alice goes to Bob and says, hey, why don't we just go back where we are right now? We have the money in this A plus B address, this aggregated public key address. Let's just go back and let's go jump directly to the final result. So they make another transaction that just closes out to the A and the B. And they put that on chain. What does everybody else see? Everybody else sees a pay-to-public key hash address, another pay-to-public key hash address, normal-looking Bitcoin Cash transactions, nothing weird going on. They have no idea that there's a smart contract, all this cryptography happening behind the scenes. It's just regular Bitcoin Cash stuff happening. And yeah, just to compare, so the final result, you've changed the pay-to-script hash address to a pay-to-public key hash address. That's what the final result looked like. And that's more private, yeah. But so there's a problem. You can't actually do this on Bitcoin Cash right now securely. It's not actually secure because there's the malleation problem. So it's like funds get held hostage, and I'm just going to explain why that is. So let's go back to the step where Alice, she's got this continuation transaction. She's ready to go. She broadcasts the funding transaction. She's waiting for it to get confirmed. And then a block comes in and, oh, my coin just got spent by a different transaction. It's almost the same transaction, but a little bit different. Something changed in the spending scripts. And this is an unfortunate feature of the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin scripting language. It's very flexible. You can do identical things in different ways, but that changes the transaction ID. And unfortunately, now that continuation transaction is useless. It spends a coin with a different serial number, even though the coins are pretty much equivalent. And now Alice's funds are stuck on an address that she shares with Bob. And she has to go to Bob and say, hey, can you help me get my funds out? And Bob can say, okay, pay me half and I'll help you out. So that's not really what Alice wants. So if this is a problem, this breaks the whole protocol. So I call this a hostage problem. A lot of people call this the malleability problem. But I call it a hostage problem because you can fix malleability to fix this, but that's not the only way to fix it. So there are actually many ways to fix this. One is called the sig hash no input. This was like an original idea suggested for Lightning Network. And this makes it so you can have a continuation transaction that's insensitive to the malleation of the funding transaction. Okay, so that's one way. You can have SegWit. That's if you can only do soft forks, that's a good approach. I mean, it's complicated. You have all these new SegWit addresses. It has a lot of complication, but well, what can you do? That's your malleability fix. Another more, a little bit less elegant, but simpler approach is what's called the whack-a-mole script restrictions. So just going into the Bitcoin Cash scripting language and finding all these flexibilities that we don't really like and just clamping down on them one by one. You can also introduce a new transaction format, like it might happen on Bitcoin Cash one day, and you can make it non-malleable. And then there's also this new technology called Taproot that could be introduced that makes it so you don't need a continuation transaction. You actually have the smart contract embedded in the paid-to-public key hash address using a cryptographic trick. All these are consensus rule changes, though. And Bitcoin Cash has been making consensus rule changes, many of them. And one of the things we've been going for is these script restrictions, because this malleability doesn't just hurt these off-chain constructions. It also hurts unconfirmed chains of transactions, for example. It makes it easy for miners to break them. So we'll actually have the final piece in place in the November upgrade. So you'll be able to make those funding transactions that are non-malleable, and then all the rest follows. And maybe in the future we'll have other fixes of malleability that might exist. And those will actually make things a little bit simpler if you do more advanced constructions. I don't really want to go into the details, but maybe these other things might happen one day. But any of them are enough, and in November we'll have this middle one, and that's enough to do this thing. And I left the smart contract vague, but just to give some examples, what you can hide behind this, you could do a payment channel. You could do a bidirectional payment channel like Lightning. You can do L2 with check data sig using some tricks. If you wanted, you could build a payment channel network. I don't think Bitcoin Cash needs it. It's very complicated. There's lots of problems that we're seeing with the Lightning Network. But if you want a direct payment channel, peer-to-peer, you can do this. And it's going to appear on-chain like nothing special. Nobody's going to know that that's a payment channel. You can do atomic swaps inside of these things. So you can set up a payment channel and then do high-frequency atomic swaps. Every millisecond, you can do a new atomic swap with somebody. And these escrow contracts, you can stuff these behind one of these paid-to-public key hash addresses. So now the exchange has no idea that you did a crazy escrow thing. They don't need to know that. And yeah, many more things. But yeah, there are some limitations. So if it's not an interactive protocol, so for example, Carol's Bicinas contract, it's like a donations contract where you put a coin on chain and the recipient can kind of milk the coin regularly. It's like they're milking a cow or something. There's this last will contract, which is, if you die, then your funds can be unlocked by somebody after a certain time, like a dead man switch. These are less interactive, so they're not really suitable for this scheme where you have an address where you need two people to sign. It doesn't really work out that well. So these belong on chain, and they don't really make sense with this approach. And as I mentioned, the malleability fix that we have is probably the most limited form. So it's enough to do this. It's enough to kick off. You can bounce off one of these pay-to-public key hash addresses, and you can do a lot of stuff. But it makes some things awkward. It's just in the technical details. But the fact that we have check data sig actually opens up a huge realm of possibilities. So it really compensates for that. But yeah, that's all I want to talk about today. And that's the end of my talk. It is based on this gist I published. It is here. Okay.